Well, we've reached the final installment in the series that we've been doing for Lent, working with this book up here called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. The subtitle of the book is The Timeless Art of Turning Trials into Triumph. And it's a book about how people throughout history have applied the principles of Stoic philosophy in order to overcome all sorts of challenges and obstacles in their lives. If we're honest with ourselves, very often when we face an obstacle or a challenge, we usually respond by complaining and doing nothing. Well, the Stoics would counsel us to manage our perceptions and emotions. That's where it starts. Manage our perceptions, manage our emotions, and then focus on the things that we can control and stay engaged with life, and especially stay engaged with each other. The final chapter of the book is a short postscript with the title, "You're Now a Philosopher." Congratulations. Unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people today want to be philosophers. Philosophy has gotten the reputation of being something that's of very little practical value, a sterile academic exercise where you study abstract concepts that have little or no connection to reality. Kind of like this little bit of snark from Willy Wonka. "Oh, you got a degree in philosophy. I hear they're hiring in ancient Greece." Or here's another one, I couldn't resist one more. This is from the most interesting man in the world who says, "I don't always talk to philosophy majors, but when I do, I tell them my coffee order." True story. Most philosophy departments at major universities have a required course in becoming a barista. And I exaggerate, but the field of philosophy can indeed get mired down in some arguments over some very strange stuff. For example, here's something that they spend a lot of time wondering about. If the fountain of youth makes you live forever, what happens if you drown in it? Huh? That'll keep you up at night. But every field of study can get bogged down in arcane and unproductive things. So philosophy gets this undeserved reputation because actually philosophy is supposed to be something that becomes a way of life. It means to approach life with a sense of curiosity. That's what a philosopher does. Approaches life with a sense of curiosity, life as a mystery, as something to be solved, a puzzle to enjoy, or as Henry David Thoreau put it, he said, "To be a philosopher is not merely to have subtle thoughts, nor even to found a school. It is to solve some of the problems of life, not only theoretically, but practically." There's that word practical again. It's meant to be practical. The ancient Stoic philosophers wanted to offer a way of life that would be available to everyone. Something that was grounded in an ethical system that was designed to bring about the greatest good for the greatest number of people. This was something that was supposed to be available and be able to be understood not just by the elite who had studied at the different universities at the time, not just the elite and the powerful, but everyone who could learn the ideas and put them into practice. The founders of the Stoic school, I think, are really good examples of how this worked, because they all came from humble backgrounds and they used philosophy to help them to overcome hardship. This is Zeno of Citium up here. He's regarded as the first founder of the Stoic school, and he started studying philosophy after he was shipwrecked. He was shipwrecked, he lost everything, and so he started studying philosophy. Another founder was this next guy up here, Epictetus. He was born a slave, and he's usually depicted with a crutch at his side. You can see that in the picture up there because he was born with a bad leg. He studied philosophy as a way to overcome the challenges that he faced. And one of the things that they all insisted on is that Philosophy should provide people with a way to discern between good and evil, first and foremost. This is why most of the major Greek philosophical schools have very specific and well-developed ethical teachings based on core virtues, a system that we call today virtue ethics. And this is something that the world kind of got away from as Christianity became the predominant ideology. Christianity started to spread, and instead of virtues, we got commandments, right? We got commandments, and commandments for the most part are stated in the negative. Thou shalt not. Commandments tell you what not to do. And the main reason that you don't do those things is because you want to avoid supernatural punishment after death. You didn't practice being good for the sake of being good. You did it to get your eternal reward and to avoid the eternal torment of hellfire. And of course that hellfire would be invoked by a just and merciful God, but at some point, all human beings, we need rules. We do need some commandments to follow, especially as children, because we don't come into this world equipped to make those kinds of decisions for ourselves. So you have to make a few rules. Even the Buddha had to make a few rules. There's something like 400 rules that the Buddha issued. So sometimes you need some rules, and then you have to know when to grow out of it. The commandments should be regarded as a bare minimum. At some point we have to take responsibility for our own actions and engage in ethical conduct because it is good in and of itself. We do it for the benefit of ourselves, we do it for the benefit of others. We move beyond the letter of the law and capture the spirit of the law. And again, this is where virtue ethics come into play. Now, in a couple of weeks, as we get a little closer to Easter, I'm going to talk about Jesus as a teacher of ethics, as a teacher of virtue ethics. It's true, he was an observant Jew. He followed the commandments, but he was constantly asking people to go beyond the letter of the law. Because over and over you would hear him saying this thing that he said, something like, you have heard that it was said, but I say to you. Here's a rather extreme example from Matthew. You've probably heard this one before. You have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Go beyond the letter of the law. Be aware of what is going on at the level of consciousness, because heck, even Jimmy Carter had to cop to that one. You remember that? Even Jimmy Carter had to cop to that one. That is a very stoic statement from Jesus. He's telling his audience, it's not enough just to obey the letter of the law. You have to learn to control your passions. You have to learn to control your emotions, because that's where the real danger comes from. And as I said, we'll talk more about the ethical teachings of Jesus in a couple of weeks, but today we focus on the virtue ethics of the Stoic school, which again is the subject of this book we've been working with. So Stoic philosophy has 4 cardinal virtues which are derived from the teachings of Plato. Here they are: wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation. And you might be thinking the same thing I did when I first saw those. Wow, just 4? Is that all there is? What seems to be missing? What do you think needs to be added to this list? Anyone? Love.
Compassion.
Compassion, kindness. Peace. Honesty, integrity maybe, stuff like that. Interesting, isn't it? In fact, the same thing will happen when we look at any system of virtue ethics, whether it's the 12 powers in unity or the Buddhist precepts. There's always a couple that seem to be missing. The good news is that they only seem to be missing. Nothing is actually missing. Usually the seemingly missing piece can be found in one of the deeper layers of a principle that's already up there. Or you get to it by combining a couple of them. In the Stoic system of virtue ethics, the 4 cardinal virtues have these deeper layers of meaning from which we can derive whatever seems to be missing. That's the kind of expectation that you set up for an adult. Don't have to spell everything out. You don't have to spoon feed. When you work with these things, when you play with them, you get at the deeper layers of meaning and you realize that nothing really is missing. So let's start with wisdom. Here we go. Wisdom. At a basic level, wisdom is defined as the ability to make sensible decisions and judgments based on personal knowledge and experience. Okay, that's a bit dry, but we break it down into these components. We get a little more clarity. Wisdom breaks down into things like good sense, good calculation, quick-wittedness, discretion, resourcefulness. Do you get the idea? You could sit with these cardinal virtues and contemplate what different things are related. What is it that's related to wisdom? What else would fit within that definition of wisdom? We move on to justice. The dry definition of justice is fairness or reasonableness, especially in the way people are treated or decisions are made. Now look at how nicely this one unpacks. Justice breaks down into altruism or selflessness, honesty, equity, fair dealing. That's where the integrity is and all of those kind of things. Now, we still don't see love, empathy, or compassion, but it's there. Justice involves this idea of being able to see self and other as one. It's the embodiment of the golden rule. That's really what it comes down to. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And it's wisdom as well. So it's all there. Moving on to courage. Now, this one's probably a little bit easier to define. Courage is the ability to face danger, difficulty, uncertainty, or pain without being overcome by fear or being deflected from a chosen course of action. Out of that, here's what we get. Endurance, confidence, high-mindedness, cheerfulness, and industriousness. And finally, we have moderation. Moderation used to be called temperance, which provides us with another case study in how language evolves. When I hear the word temperance, I think of this. That's the old Women's Temperance League. Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours. Prohibition, our grand national experiment that created organized crime as we know it today. Here's some prize shots of what went on during Prohibition. Created organized crime as we know it today, which once again shows us the law of unintended consequences at work once again. Today, when we use the word temperance, we think of it almost exclusively as abstinence from alcohol. That's what the word has come to mean. The original meaning was restraint, which is where we get moderation. Restraint or moderation, within reasonable limits and never to excess. So, moderation includes good discipline. Here's another kind of old word, but I left it up there. Seemliness. Seemliness, which simply means appropriate to the circumstances. You have modesty, you have self-control, and so on with things like that. So you can see that when we talk about 4 cardinal virtues, there's a lot more to it than just those 4 words. A lot more to it than meets the eye at first glance, which is the way it should be. We don't need to be spoon-fed. We can learn to look past appearances to get at that deeper truth that's always there. The problem when you try to spell everything out in detail is that you end up with a list that's longer than your arm. You know what I'm saying? And it gets to be an exercise in memorization. It gets to be more of an exercise in rote memorization than it is trying to, as we say, capture the spirit of it. We memorize the words, but we never go beyond that. So all you need to remember are those 4 things: wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation. People who practice Stoicism today have a variety of practices that have been handed down from ancient times, and I've listed 3 of them in your handout that we've given you today, 3 of them that you might find useful, 3 exercises. The first one is called morning meditation. Very simple practice. Set aside some time. It doesn't have to be very long. Just set aside time at the beginning of the day to mentally go over what's up, right? What's coming today? What are some of the potential challenges during the day ahead? And then simply note which of the 4 cardinal virtues we might be called upon to exercise and bring in response to those situations, those challenges. Also, in the morning, I like to think of a practice that's recommended by Marcus Aurelius, whose writings form the basis of our book. And here's what he says. This is his counsel. He says, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. Let me pause for a moment, okay? We don't want to affirm that. However, we know that this is the reality, that we are likely to run into people who will be disagreeable, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, whatever you want to call it. He goes on to say that they are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. Not of the same blood and birth, but the same mind, possessing a share of the divine. And so, none of them can hurt me. No one can implicate me in ugliness, nor can I feel angry at my relative or hate him. We were born to work together like feet, hands, and eyes, like the 2 rows of teeth, upper and lower. To obstruct each other is unnatural. To feel anger at someone, to turn your back on him, these are unnatural. That's a pretty positive way to start the day. Now, another practice that they recommend doing is something similar to morning meditation, except you do it in the evening, and you look backwards at the day. A brief review of the day, where we ask these 3 questions that were given to us by Epictetus. The 3 questions he gives us is, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? What duty was left undone? Was there something that was mine to do that I did not engage? And I would add one more question. How did we work with the virtues, and what might we improve upon tomorrow? If we didn't get something right, if we disappointed ourselves, well, what can I do tomorrow to do better? And finally, there's a wonderful visualization exercise that you'll probably recognize because Karen uses it from time to time during our meditation time on Sunday. It's called Hypercleans Circle. Hypercleans Circle. And I've talked about this idea of learning how to expand our circles of caring and compassion. This is where the concept comes from. So you can see here, you start with the self. Me, my mind, my body, expanding outwards to family, friends, fellow citizens, countrymen, humankind as a whole, and those circles keep on expanding because eventually we're going to include nature. And based upon what we're learning about the universe, we would add an additional circle beyond that to encompass the entire expanding universe. It's a way to remind ourselves that the rest of the world is just as important as we are, and that we need to make it a habit to be concerned about things beyond the self, the family, the tribe. We've become extremely tribal in this country of late. We need to go beyond this idea of my tribe versus your tribe and eventually get that circle out there into all of humankind and preferably the entire universe. And if you get bored with the 4 Stoic virtues, well, you can apply the same morning and evening meditation techniques to work with whatever you choose. Try working with the 12 powers from unity. Work with the Buddhist precepts. Work with the Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount, which we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks. You know, these systems are not mutually exclusive. They are the ways that different cultures captured these key virtues and taught them. They're the products of different cultures, so feel free to explore them all. Feel free to mix them up a little bit because they're all good. They all work in their own way. And that's really what we're called upon to do if we're going to call ourselves students of truth or truth seekers or on the spiritual path. That's what it involves, is taking responsibility for making these things into something that is personally relevant and practical and really a way of life. So that's all on The Obstacle is the Way, and we'll start again with something new next week. See you then.